There, that's going. All right, welcome back to the Contrarians. We're back at it again. We have another great panel discussion for you. This is a bit of a different one. We're going to be doing a dark horse artist. So we're going to be talking about a band that maybe has not gotten the appreciation or the recognition or maybe the success that they deserve, and we're going to find out if that's something that our panelists here agree with or disagree with. We'll get their thoughts on the band, and we'll sort of see where we're going. So today we are talking about Living Colour. And I've pulled up my wrong notes here. Give me 1 second. Oh, where'd they go? All right, I'm gonna have to start this over because I just goofed pretty bad there. Where did my notes go? I must have closed it. All right, let's start this again. All right, welcome back to the Contrarians. We're back at it again. We got another great panel discussion here for you today. We're going to be doing a bit of a different format. We're doing the Dark Horse artist. So we're going to be talking about a band that maybe has not gotten enough recognition, or maybe is underappreciated, or maybe just didn't receive the success that we as Contrarians think they deserve. So we've got a great panel here today, and they're going to let you know what they think, and we'll find out where this band lies on the quality spectrum. So today we're going to be talking about Living Colour. Living Colour is an American rock band. They were formed in New York in 1984. They were active from 1984 to 1995, and then reformed in the 2000s. In 2000, and they've been continuing on since then. We've got a great panel here today. We've got Reed, we've got Andee, we've got John the Music Nut. So each of them is going to give a sort of thesis statement on the band, how they feel about it, maybe share some cool facts. But before we get into that, if you'd like the Contrarians, if you want to talk about music, please join the discussion in the comments below. There's always a second debate there, and we want to hear your voice. If you want to help the channel grow, you can give a like, you can give subscribe, you can share with your friends, and there's other ways to support the channel too in the description, like Patreon, et cetera, et cetera. But enough about that stuff. Let's get right into it. Let's start today with Reed. Reed, why don't you tell us your thoughts on Living Colour and whether you think they're a band that deserves more recognition, fame, success, whatever it is. Let's hear it.
Okay, so Living Colour. I was interested to see this topic come up on the Patreon suggestions. I would say not a huge fan of the band historically, but I was in right at the beginning. I can remember the very first time I ever heard them, and that was by watching their video for the song Cult of Personality. And I remember the VJ, I don't remember his name anymore, but I remember the VJ saying, and their guitarist, he does this really incredible sort of chromatic thing that nobody else is doing. And I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. So as I've said on other chats, I'm mostly into bands for the guitar players and the singers. And even though in Living Colour, or I should say Living Colour, In Living Colour was a sitcom, a sketch comedy show that actually came out at the same time that Living Colour started producing records. There's even a history there. But they have a great bass player, a couple of great bass players, and a great drummer, but I was always in them for the guitar player and the singer. The band just has, you know, weapon after weapon after weapon. They were great songwriters. Vernon Reid is unquestionably one of the most creative guitarists to come out of his generation. He just seems to have an endless thirst for experimentation in guitar. Corey Glover is an amazing vocalist and sometime actor. I don't know what all he's been in. I know he was in the movie Platoon because I saw him in that. I'm sure he was in other things as well. But for when their first album, Vivid, came out, this was deep in my days of if it's not heavy metal, I'm not interested. So Cult of Personality was a very heavy song. And just as the VJ said, very unique. It has this really frantic guitar to it, which there wasn't anybody else recording music like that at the time. Great melody, great hooks to it. So a friend of mine got Vivid and we listened to it a lot. And the album I would classify as something that Martin Popoff calls a peaks and valleys album. There are 7 or 8 different styles of song on the album. They include some hip hop, some soul, some funk, some hard rock, some punk rock. And honestly, for me, that is too much going on at one time. There are 3 songs on that album that I absolutely love, which were Cult of Personality, Middleman, and Desperate People. I never hear anybody talk about Desperate People, but that was my favorite track on the album. It's kind of sparse and open and just has this big crushing, this riff singer structure that I've always been drawn to. But then some of the other songs really didn't connect. And I thought, if these guys are really going to make it, they need to pick a style, because bands that do too much, I think, confuse their audiences, right? We tend to like simpler things. People want to be able to pigeonhole their music. And I'm sorry, this is all, widely casting aspersions on people's musical preferences, but that's generally the way the music public, if you're listening to punk rock, you don't want to listen to prog rock, right? You want it to be one thing. So then they came out with Time's Up, and lo and behold, they picked a direction and ran with it, and their direction was hard rock. And this was at the time when the LA bands and hair metal was really in ascendancy and ruled what rock space there was on the airwaves. So Living Color was something very, very different. And yet there was still something about them that didn't really click with me. And I still, all of these years later, I don't really know what it is. Some of it may be the social consciousness of their lyrics. I have to say, I am not particularly qualified to talk about the social agenda of the band or the social impact of the band. As I like to put it, I grew up in the Mountain West, where even the ground is white 6 months a year, if you know what I'm saying. A band that was made up of people talking about race relations and inner city problems, I can't relate to that. That is not a part of my reality. So the lyrical content never hit with me. And sometimes their music can be very frantic. There's just so much going on. The drums are frantic, the bass is frantic, the guitar is frantic. And it's the songs where they dial it back, like Desperate People, that really I connect with most. And you notice that commercially, Vivid was by far their best-selling album. Time's Up sold less. By the time they put out Stained, it was not particularly commercially successful. And I remember getting it and thinking, well, this is fine. But again, it didn't really connect with me. So I kind of missed their later output, and just recently listened to their most recent album, which came out in 2019, Shade. And it is a killer album. And it still very much sounds like Time's Up to me. It's hard rock with a lot of experimentation. Vernon Reid is kind of a maximalist as a guitarist. He plays bluesy sometimes, he plays soul and funk, but he's one of the few hard rock guitarists that you'll hear using a ring modulator in a song. If you don't know what that is, it's a really aggressive effect that sometimes bass players are known for using, but it's rare in rock music. I watched a couple of videos before we came to this chat, where they were going through Vernon Reid's rig rundown, one from 2013, I think, and one from 2016. And the man's rig is almost literally insane. He's playing through 3 amps, 2 giant pedal boards, a guitar synthesis system, a guitar emulator. He's got an iPad going. He's running like 6 lines in parallel. It's incredible. I have no idea how he can, and I love guitar effects. And I'm like, I have no idea how he keeps up with any of it. And he clearly understands it inside out. He's given this demonstration. He's going through all of the, and then I do this and this, and I've got this line running here, and this is in mono, and this is in stereo. And the man is really into his technology and guitar picks. You very rarely hear, even guitar players very rarely geek out about their picks, but Vernon Reid loves his guitar picks. So still, they are an absolutely unique band. Nobody else sounds like them. They produce some fantastic very experimental hard rock, sometimes throwing in some blues and soul and funk elements. If anybody hasn't checked them out, I mean, if you are into hard rock with an experimental edge, they're absolutely worth tracking down and checking out. I said the rest of it, their social agenda, I don't really feel qualified to comment on that too much. I will say, if you don't know much about the history of race relations in music, and it's a pretty deep subject, check out this book, Flowers in the Dustbin by James Miller. He goes into a pretty extensive history in the 40s and 50s and 60s. It's a real eye-opener if you don't know much about it. Just have your thesaurus with you. It's very academic. And like all academics, he likes to use all of the words in the English language. But Living Color, check them out. They're fantastic.
Awesome. Thanks, Reed. That was great. Let's go to Andee next. Andee, why don't you tell us your thoughts on Living Color?
All right. Well, I guess when I think about the emergence of Living Color, I think about this weird, serendipitous groundswell of bands that started to come out of the underground in the late 80s. Unrelated bands from different far-flung localities. They're pretty much all from the United States, but they're all quite geographically far from each other. So you had, I guess we're talking about, heavy metal, and this is sort of a band that kind of trades in metal to a certain extent. And Living Color, when they arose in the late 80s, it was at the same time as Jane's Addiction, Faith No More, Fishbone. I guess Saigon Kick is almost, I would put them in a similar category as far as just being bands that sort of could identify as metal, but they were just smarter than the stuff that was going at the time. And it wasn't like they were going around saying, we're providing a more intellectually substantive alternative. No, they were just smarter people. And you had like Jane's Addiction were kind of this weird hedonistic, spiritual, but nonetheless very, very smart band with a lot of drug culture and stuff like that. King's X were a very spiritual band. That's another band I don't think I mentioned first time around. They came along and they ticked off a lot of the boxes for any kind of a heavy metal fan, but they didn't sing lyrics that made you cringe. They weren't a bunch of stupid frat boys. They weren't singing about partying. Faith No More were kind of like this absurdist kind of poking fun at rock and at the music industry. They were that kind of flavor, kind of a post Zappa kind of thing. And then Living Color was by far the most explicitly socially conscious band. All those bands I mentioned had non-white members, I believe. Not Saigon Kick, but everyone else, Fishbone, all Black Americans. I think that lends something to the diversity of their personal melting pots musically. And so, Reed, you were talking about how they were kind of all over the place. And I know that Vernon, his and those guys in that band, when they were coming up, they were hearing all kinds of stuff that was blowing their minds, that just cumulatively added to their personal musical fulfillment. So they loved Led Zeppelin, they loved James Brown, they loved Parliament, they loved Kool and the Gang, and jazz and Afro-Cuban music, and just it goes on and on and on. And for them, it was never, well, you have to pick one or the other. It was a cumulative thing. It was never subtractive. Like, well, if I like hardcore, if I like Bad Brains, then I can't like disco anymore. Or, you know, it was all just additive, constantly additive. So that in itself is like an interesting, it's an interesting kind of comment on its own, as they were listening to white music and black music. They also grew up when Jim Crow laws were still in effect, and there was a lot of insane racial strife happening when they were kids. So their music was bound to be more socially conscious than the average white rock band in the 80s, who were singing about champagne and limos. So they're also a New York band, and they just grew up with this panoply of musical styles happening all over the streets. You know, disco was born here, hip hop was born here, punk rock was born here. And then there were all these kind of like Latin music and avant-garde and noise and jazz and free jazz and all this kind of stuff. And they soaked all that in. Now they're kind of an unlikely band to have a big hit. I will say that. But at the same time, I think that they deserved to be popular. Even just for the one song, I think that song deserves to be popular. It's really smart. It's really prescient. It's timeless. I'm kind of just going off the cuff here. I didn't have time to like prepare any kind of, even my thoughts, or even to like listen through to the whole catalog or anything. But yeah, I would say that, you know, as far as the eclecticism of their music, they're kind of drawing from the same backdrop as a lot of the 70s bands that they probably listened to. Led Zeppelin tackled every genre imaginable. The Beatles, Queen. I think Faith No More were contemporaries of Living Colour that were also like that. And I think they did it successfully. You know, you have, you know, even just looking at the guest artists that are showing up on their records. Public Enemy's on there, Queen Latifah's on there, you know, Little Richard, Mick Jagger. So really an interesting, you know, the fact that their various musical interests overlap in these strange ways, to where you have these I would say the strange bedfellows appearing as guests on their albums is kind of cool. I think that their second album is their magnum opus. That's the one that's called Time's Up. And I think it was relatively popular. I think they had, what were the popular songs from that one? Love Rears Its Ugly Head, Pride, History Lesson, Type. These are real anthemic songs. And I think that was the album where they had this confidence, and they had permission to stretch out, and they each had kind of little showcases woven into the album along the track listing. You had you know, just kind of little interludes of the individual members doing their thing. They were such a mature band. They were so wise beyond their years. I mean, the lyrics are so wise in these songs. There's nothing in there that you would roll your eyes at. If anything, it's like, how did they know? You know, how are they already so, I don't know, I guess they're old souls, let's say. A song like This Is the Life is just amazingly poignant. There are social critiques that are absolutely scathing. Information Overload is a song that warned of AI, you know, 30 years in advance. You know, that there are things like, you know, I didn't mean to say History Lesson was a hit. History Lesson was a prelude to Pride, which was the hit. And Pride is sort of a song that refers to this the false history that can be taught in schools when it comes to race. And that's something that they also touched on the first album with Which Way to Your America, which is an amazingly scathing song about classism and materialism and the disconnect between the America that was portrayed on television sets in the 80s and the reality of life for America, a lot of Americans in the 80s. So there's just a lot to sink your teeth into. There's a lot of thought-provoking stuff. And yeah, Reed, as you say, the musicianship is very dense as well. They all can really, really, really play. And sometimes it comes across a little free jazz-like. But yeah, they also know how to establish a really solid groove, and they're all funk scholars, so they know how to do that. So I think their second album is their magnum opus. Stain is definitely a darker, more gnarly kind of thing. Doug Wimbish joins the band at that point. He's the bass player to this day. Doug Wimbish was, one of the forefathers of hip hop. I mean, he was a member of Sugar Hill Gang. He played on Grandmaster Flash tunes, Curtis Blow. So, man, you just have so much music history just adding to this story of this band. That album was I think harder. It was a little thornier than Time's Up. But you had Ignorance is Bliss. Nothingness is a really beautiful song. Talked about gender stuff and sexuality, and it was a pretty brave song to tackle at that point, in the mid 90s. They were really ahead of the curve as far as talking about a lot of touchy subjects. Then they split up. They come back in the 2000s, or when did they put out I'm drawing a blank on Kaleidoscope. Came out in 2002 or 3, I believe. That's the one I know the least. I used to have a copy of it. I can't find it now. That was sort of an awkward getting back together kind of thing for them. I don't think that they really had the groove back yet. But I don't know, there's probably some great songs on there, but I remember it being kind of uneven. And then The Chair in the Doorway is to me, this is sort of the follow-up to Stain. I believe this came out in 2008 or 9. And it's got a sort of a proggy song called The Chair, which is a quasi title track, and that's in 7/8 time. And Decadence is a super heavy song. It's a really punchy, aggressive album. Behind the Sun was a single, which is kind of a more approachable version of Living Color, a little gentler. Bless kind of has like a raw gut bucket kind of bluesy vibe to it. And anyway, I think this is a really, really solid album. And then Shade, I think, is the best thing that they've done since, let's say, Stain. By the way, this came out in 2017, slight correction, Reed. And a little bit more modern production. I love the production of Shade because it kind of harkens back to that noisy Ed Stasium sound of their first 2 albums, which was pretty reverby, that sound. It was kind of a clattering, kind of caustic sound. But there's all kinds of Pro Tools fun going on in here, and editing, and sort of I don't know, just little touches that bring it into the present a little bit. So yeah, just a couple of they had a single called Come On, which is just like a really uplifting kind of, it sounds very spontaneous, and it's kind of a fist pumper. Who Shot Ya is really kind of the cornerstone of the album. That's a cover of a Biggie Smalls tune. And when you listen to that song while you're watching the video, it's it's kind of the way you have to take it in, I think, because it is a painful condemnation of the state of gun violence in this country. And I think that's sort of like the emotional core of this album, Shade, is oddly enough this cover tune of Who Shot Ya. What else do we have on here? Program is a really cool tune. It's sort of I think it's kind of picking up where Information Overload left off, and it's about being like this with your screens and starting to merge with the algorithms. They are one of the best live bands I've ever seen. I've seen them many times, and they are unbelievably, I don't know, there's just they're also unbelievably good at what they do, especially Corey, who would normally be, as the singer, he'd be the first one to start losing his chops. But that guy is unstoppable live. I've never seen him not completely destroy it on stage and leave everything on the stage. I've seen them do shows where they just do an encore with just the most unlikely cover tunes, like The Clash, and then James Brown, and then something else. I can't remember. They did like 3 cover songs this one night. They were all so, stylistically different. Absolutely unbelievable live band. Doug Wimbish does a bass solo, which is normally the kind of thing I would be like, okay, I'm going to the bathroom now. But I've never seen a more musical, more spontaneous, more entertaining bass solo. So musical, so soulful, so imaginative, so spontaneous. Did I already say that? Yeah, I think they're still playing in these big clubs, and I think they deserve to be a bigger band because of just by virtue of how amazing they are live. But again, that there's a lot of bands that are that good that are sort of staying in that level. Their music, I think, is making no attempts whatsoever at being mainstream or seeking commercial success. I think that their music is confrontational. I think it's got a lot of stuff in there that is it's there lyrically and musically. There's a lot of stuff to try to process, but I think that it's an amazing catalog to take your time getting through. And I really, really urge everyone to spend time with Time's Up and really listen to all the songs and read the lyrics. And that to me is like the cornerstone of the whole catalog, and then branch out from there. I love this band, and I think they're a quintessential New York City band. And I'm glad they had any kind of a shot at all. I mean, they're a very unlikely band to just have a hit in the 80s. Anyway, that's all I have to say for now. I know that was a lot.
No, that was great. Thanks, Andee. That was awesome.
Yeah.
You really you painted a picture and spoke really eloquently to a lot of what makes this band cool. So that's great. Let's go to John next. Last but not least, let's hear your thoughts on Living Color.
Thank you so much. I'm going to echo a lot of sentiments that Rita and Andee made. I'm going to talk about what they mean to me. So when I first saw the Call to Personality video and I picked up Vivid, I thought this band was going to rule the world because of their talents, of their lyrics, and the great songs and the hooks. Call to Personality, when my friends and I first saw this video, we were like, holy shit, this is amazing. And so catchy. And then it would eventually become their biggest hit, their signature song. It went to number 13 on Billboard's Hot 100. But there is so many great songs on this album. There are a couple songs that are a bit on the poppier side, but that's Broken. I'm sorry. I want to know and Broken Hearts, but they're just great songs. Open Letter to a Landlord would be the third single, and I'll get into the second single a little bit. When I heard that song, I'm like, how is this not an anthem? Because it was something I wasn't going to be able to identify with this. I grew up in a quiet small town, and then I eventually moved to the country. So I was never going to be able to deal with the things that they're talking about on this song. But the song resonated with me, and I still think it should have been as big as Cult of Personality was. And just the fact that they're talking about so many different things on here. Funny Vibe is a song about race, yet it's so musical and it's so funky and catchy. Such a great song. They do a wonderful version of Memories Can Wait from the Talking Heads on here. They make it very aggressive. The thing with their cover, they do a lot of covers, and most of the time they work. They made the songs their own. But so many great songs on here. Desperate People, Middleman. This whole album, this is a classic, a modern classic. And they outdid themselves on Time's Up. Time's Up, I've had discussions with people who say, it's a good album, but it's a mess. To me, it's a wonderful mess. To me, this is where I thought they could do no wrong, because they had all these great songs, all these different genres. All of them are so great. Time's Up is their ode to Bad Brains. And then they go right into some mid-tempo groove and Pride, and then Love Rears Its Ugly Head. It goes into like this quasi blues, and they're all excellent tracks. And the hooks were still here. They wouldn't have any hits on here because, as infectious as a song like Elvis Is Dead is, I don't know if it was ever going to get played on the radio because of the lyrical content. Because you got Little Richard doing his cameo, but they're talking about how Elvis gets, well, at the time, everyone was saying, oh yeah, I saw Elvis here, I saw Elvis there. This was in 1990. But here they're saying, Elvis wasn't the king, more or less. But then you have Solace of You, which is this wonderful ballad, but it's not the traditional power ballad that you heard at that time. It's, it was just beautifully done in a totally like light jazz genre.
Calypso,
absolutely. It was different. I loved Fight the Fight, how it was very slow, like a slow burn, and then it would get really heavy and then go back to slow again. This Is the Life is a fantastic closer. I mean, everything on here, even like New Jack Theme and Someone Like You, those songs really hit hard. But yeah, magnum opus, I agree. That was Time's Up. And in 1993, they would come out with Stain. Now, this is an angrier album, a heavier album, not as diverse musically. There wasn't going to be a hit on here like Bye is the catchiest song musically and has a cool chorus, but you weren't going to have a song about that topic on the radio in 1993. They were over a lot of people's heads, but those of us who liked them really appreciated them. But so many great songs on here, very heavy. Postman, that is so heavy and ferocious. That bass is right up in the mix. It sounds like something someone should come to the ring to for a fight. But I also loved Leave It Alone, which was the video. Ignorance is Bliss is a great song. Wall is a great song. Those two songs they still play live pretty frequently. And a great ballad again in Nothingness, but again, different than your traditional ballad at that point. But, you know, they still do some different things musically. This Little Pig is punk, you know, but it hits hard. Never Satisfied, Mind Your Own Business. Those songs hit hard as well. And interesting thing that I read about this album, and I always wondered, why didn't this go gold? Well, this got taken off the market for many years because a member of the band, Stain, sued them, and the album didn't get re-released until the mid-2010s, which I always wondered why it sold a little bit and it just stopped. But nonetheless, this is a great album, nearly on the level of the first two. Now, they did take their break, and in the meantime, Corey Glover did an album called Hymns. And here he goes more R&B. This is a very good album, but it's different. It's not the hard-hitting sound. It's more focused on his soulful voice. And Andee, I'm with you. I've seen them live. I saw them live on the Stain tour. And he has lost nothing vocally, and he still sounds amazing live. But this is a very good album. If you like R&B, this is very good. And Vernon Reid would do a solo album as well during that time. And then they put out Kaleidoscope. And it's this album right here. But this was on Sanctuary Records. This was released in 2003. Now, when I first heard this album, I was disappointed because it seemed like a few good songs at the beginning and then a sea of mediocrity. But I mean, I had to give it some time. Like, this would have been like a 5 out of 10 for me at one point, just because I'll talk about the songs I really love. Song Without Sin is a wicked opener. It's wicked on the level of Time's Up. I mean, it's not a punk song. It's more, it does sound a little like Bad Brains, but it's more of a metal song. Question of When is excellent. And Flying, here's a track that's light funk, and it sounds like a ballad, but if you listen to the lyrics, it's about people jumping off of the Twin Towers while they're on fire during 9/11. I mean, I first heard this, I cried. And it was like, just an amazing song. It was never, they weren't going to get hits again at this point, but this album returned them to the eclecticism of Time's Up, but I don't think the songs were as strong overall. Now, over time, I really got into the reggae song that's Nightmare City. In Your Name has so many different things going sonically. It's very, very interesting. They do a cover of Back in Black, which they never should have touched because Corey just doesn't have the voice for it. I mean, he shouldn't be singing Brian Johnson. If there's one song to avoid by Living Color, that's the one. But there were just so many. There were other good songs on here as well, like Sacred Ground, I thought was very good. But some of the others, it was a 60-minute album. If they cut a few off here, made it more like in the 45-minute range that Stain was, it would have worked. Whereas Time's Up is a longer album, but I think everything on Time's Up works. Here, the highs are very high, but there are a few songs that are okay. Now, Chair in the Doorway, I thought was, yeah, this was a return to the Stain sound. Excuse me. This is heavier. It's probably the heaviest album they've done. And the production's a little on the muddy side, but I mean, it's still a very good album. And at this point, they're on Megaforce. And Megaforce is the heavy metal label. It was the label that introduced us to Metallica and many other thrash metal bands that would also become a a label for bands to go back to when they still had something to say, but their music wasn't in vogue anymore. But The Chair is very good. Behind the Sun was a great single. Bless those. Vernon Reid sounds like he's playing like one of those pedal steel guitars on here. I love the sound on that sound on that song. But Young Man, Method, a lot of strong tracks on here. Maybe nothing on the level of Flying, but a little more consistent than Kaleidoscope was. If you like the heavy side of Living Color, this is definitely worth checking out. And this is their latest album. This is Shade. This album has some covers on it, but the production on here is their best. I think this might be their best produced album, because all the instruments are very clear in the mix. It is louder, but it's not a Loudness Wars album. It's very well recorded. I loved Program. They're at the beginning, they're kind of taking a shot at themselves with that little spoken thing, like, who's that band that did that song? And then the guy's humming the riff, the Cult of Personality. It's pretty cool, but that's a great track. I love what they did with the covers on here. Preaching Blues, they made it more of a heavier track. I love Blackout, and I love Glass Teeth. Glass Teeth is very melodic. It's a great song. Inner City Blues kicks butt. They get really subtle, like Marvin Gaye did on the original, but then it hits hard on the choruses. But yeah, to me, this was their best at Stain. But I mean, I would recommend all their albums. I mean, you have 2 10s, a 9, an 8, and maybe 2 7s here. I mean, even Kaleidoscope and Chair in a Doorway, there's still so much to offer on those albums. But they I think they should have had more success than they did, but at the same time, they were over a lot of people's heads. I think they were over the programmers' heads. I think that was the era where, you did have these great bands coming up, like Andee mentioned, which I love those bands too, like Jane's Addiction and Fishbone and Faith No More, but they still want to put everything in a box. Because some people would say this is a funk rock band. No. Oh, well, they're a metal band. No. Oh, they're a quasi punk. No, they're Living Color. They're the musical melting pot with talent out the wazoo. Great songs. Every one of them is a virtuoso at what he does. We're talking about Doug Wimbish. During their hiatus, he almost became the bass player for the Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
So I mean, so much talent in his band. Vernon Reid has done a lot of session work as well. I mean, he's got a very distinctive sound. I think they should have had more success than they did on those earlier. And Glamour Boys, and I forgot to say this before, Glamour Boys was also a number 31 hit in the United States. So they did hit the charts twice. You never hear Glamour Boys anymore. It seems like a lot of people, like the next generation, would think, oh, they're a one-hit wonder. They're not. They're one of the best bands there ever was. And I really believe that. And I would have, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is like, a lot of that's political. They choose who they want in. But to me, I mean, they were ahead of their time. You can't put them in a box. They were making great music at a time when everything was so formulaic. I mean, their stuff really stands out. I mean, the fact that they're still a great live band, to come out and kill you with a 1 hour and 45-minute set, and they can go in all different directions. It's just the way they're feeling that night. They're always great. But yeah, I love this band. Living Color, definitely check them out. Vivid or Time's Up, it can be your gateway, and then enjoy the ride.
Yeah. I actually think that Glamour Boy is for me, again, my taste being towards the heavier music, that is the song I like least on Vivid. I think it was carried to number 31 by the success of Cult of Personality, because that song was just so dominant that whatever their next song was, people were going to have interest in it. So as much as I'm trying to minimize political content here in my commentary, we'll say that when you are an artist, if you are going to choose to use your public forum to express a political opinion, regardless of what that opinion is, you are inviting people to take issue with your opinion, right? There's always going to be a segment of the population. Some people will agree with you and some people won't. And when you've got, for all intents and purposes, the only successful hard rock band consisting entirely of Black Americans talking about bad race relations, that's going to offend people. Another band that came out actually later, but kind of in the same vein, you think about like a Rage Against the Machine, and Rage Against the Machine was very political. Well, you know what? It's super easy to ignore Zach De La Rocha's lyrics. Super easy to ignore them. You can barely understand what the guy is saying. You cannot ignore Corey Glover. He's got great enunciation. He's got great tone. So the lyrics are right in your face. And that was always going to turn a bunch of people off. And they had this bug up their ass about Elvis. At about the same time that Time's Up came out, MTV started an award, and it was the Elvis Award. I remember this clearly. And they came out, they gave Living Color an Elvis Award for something. And they came out and said, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen.
Oh, good for them.
Why isn't this the Chuck Berry Award? Because Chuck Berry was so much more important. Well, one, that's wrong. Elvis was 10,000 times more popular than Chuck Berry ever was. But it's a stance, right? They have made a stance in as public a manner as they possibly can. And that is inviting people to either agree or disagree. And I think a lot of people went, you know what? Maybe not. Do like that Cult of Personality song, but I'm not really on board for the rest of this. Whereas I agree. I think they have amazing lyrics. It's more the musical side of it than the lyrical side that I find their music a little fatiguing sometimes. Which may be why on Vivid there is so many different styles, so it's not just a constant assault. Time's Up is an oral assault. There's barely a pause for breath on that album. But they were always going to be a controversial band. They courted that. It was part of what they wanted. But, that's a road to ruin much more easily than a road to success.
It's interesting. I mean, Andee, that's a great point to bring up. And Andee, you mentioned that they were brave. It sounds like they were fully aware of this and decided to go for it anyways, right? So at the end of the day here, we've gotten three panelists to give three overviews of the band. Some key points that we really got here. This is definitely a brave band, a band that's not afraid to say what they think. They're ahead of their time, very, very talented. And what was the phrase here that I wrote down from Reed? Dangerously talented. Lots of virtuosos in this band. And we got a full discography review from John, so that's great. And Andee really went in deep on the history of the band from a perspective of songwriting and context. And I think altogether we've got a panel here that really wants you to listen to Living Color. So go out there and listen to Living Color. I know I will be right after this. I'll admit I'm one of those people who only knows Cult of Personality, and it sounds like I really missed out. So if you like the Contrarians, please give a like, give a subscribe, share with your friends, etc., etc. You remember the stuff from the beginning, right? I want to thank each of our panelists for being here. Reed, Andee, John, TheMusicNut. Thank you so much, guys. This was incredible. Let's thank Living Color too for being a great band that stuck it out and definitely deserves a bit more appreciation. So let's see if us Contrarians we can go out there and maybe give them some support. Yeah, whether it's morning, day, or night, just want to thank you for being here and have a good one. Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.